In the summer of 1989, after weeks of being missing, stalking victim Cindy James was found in the yard of an abandoned house with her hands and feet hogtied behind her back and a nylon stocking around her neck. She had a small pinprick like from a needle on her arm, and she was found to have 10 times the lethal amount of morphine in her system. In spite of the way her body was found, and in spite of nearly 100 police reports that Cindy had filed prior to her death, begging police to protect her from this deranged stalker that had kidnapped and beaten her on several occasions, in spite of all of this, according to police, Cindy James had taken her own life, and they had the evidence to prove it. This is the bizarre 7-year stalking case of Cindy James. Hi, my name is Tasha, and this is my series White Rabbit, where we deep dive into anything spooky, odd, or just interesting while I apply some special effects makeup. If this is your type of content, please hit that subscribe button and be ready to fall in love with my cats who randomly make appearances in the back of my makeup videos. Before we jump into today's video, just a couple of things. Number one, I really hope that I can make it through this entire video without getting winded too much. My throat is a little dry. I'm getting over the flu. I still don't feel 100% like myself, but I'm getting there. So if I sound a little different, if my cadence is off, that's just why. I'm just still healing. Next up, I wanted to thank every single one of you who has subscribed. There are 708 of us now. Wow. I am so grateful, honestly. I've been doing this over a year now, and I've grown so much, and it's so nice to have an audience that is growing with me. So thank you so much for being here. If you want to get to know me more on a personal level, I'll have my other social media linked below. Right now, I'm most active on Snapchat. I heard it was making a comeback. Don't know if it's true.
You sit on a throne of lies.
But I'm on there. Today's makeup is my take on a sleep paralysis demon. I saw this look, well, a similar look created by Pink the Stylist, I believe his name is, and a few other creators. So this is just my take. The reason I chose this look is because this story is about the 7-year stalking and torment of Cindy James. There came a point in Cindy's life, in this experience, where she was so afraid to go to sleep because she had no idea what would happen to her. This tormentor, this stalker, became her very own sleep paralysis demon. I will link everything below if you want to know how I created this look, or if you just want to see what equipment I'm using. Okay, so let's talk about Cindy. Cynthia Elizabeth Hack was born June 12, 1944. Her mother, Matilda, was a homemaker, and her father, Otto, had retired from the Air Force and became a teacher. There were 6 Hack children. Cindy had 3 older brothers, and then she was the oldest of the girls. From what I could tell, Cindy's childhood was pretty normal. There was only one thing that I can't even confirm if it was true, but supposedly Cindy had wrote in some diaries when she was younger that her father was very strict and that he also used to get physical with his punishments. We do have to keep in mind that this is the 1950s, and in the 50s it was much more common for children to get spankings than not. And with Otto being a military man, he was not gentle parenting at all. Again, I can't confirm if this is actually true, but it's just the only thing that stood out to me in her childhood that I could find. She enrolled in nursing school in 1962, and by 1965, Cindy had met her future husband, Roy Makepeace. Roy Makepeace was a psychologist that worked at a local hospital. He was 18 years older than Cindy, and he was married when they met. A year after Cindy met Roy, she graduated, and 5 months after her graduation, Roy was already divorced and married to Cindy. Messy as hell.
I let my messy hoe shit get too messy.
So Cindy's life was changing fast. She had graduated, gotten married, started a new job, all one right after another. She started working at Vancouver General Hospital, which was a previous employer of Roy Makepeace. So I wonder if that had anything to do with it. In 1975, Cindy took on the position of team coordinator at Vancouver's Blenheim House, and there she cared for children with behavior disorders. And she worked there for a really long time. She worked there for like 12 years. She was really good at her job. She was described as hardworking, dedicated. Everyone said that she really connected with the children. Like, it was obvious that Cindy had found her calling. So in 1982, Cindy and Roy both decided that their marriage had run its course. So they wanted to file for divorce. But before filing for divorce, they had a year of trial separation. According to Roy, they had a really great marriage and they just didn't spend time together anymore. Like, they just grown very distant, but they had amicably decided to part ways. So Cindy moved out and got her own place for the very first time. So remember, Cindy went from parents to college to Roy. She had never lived on her own before, so this was a really big deal. Unfortunately for Cindy, she didn't get to enjoy her independence for very long because just a few short months later, the start of what would be a 7-year nightmare that would eventually lead to her death began. In September of 1982, Cindy began to tell her friends and family that there was a prowler in her neighborhood. And not only was there a prowler in the neighborhood, but she believed that this prowler was targeting her. She said that someone was lurking around her house and that she was being watched. On October 7th, 1982, Cindy received the first of many phone calls from who she was sure was the prowler. Now, the person didn't say anything initially. They just sat on the phone, breathing really heavily into the receiver. You know, that old creepy loser shit. After a while, Cindy just hung up the phone. After the first phone call, Cindy started receiving calls on a regular basis, and they were getting more and more threatening. Once the caller started to verbally threaten Cindy, she was able to confirm that this was a man that was harassing her.
Shocker.
Sometimes this man would verbally assault her, sometimes it was sexual advances, and other times he would describe to her all of the ways that he would torture and eventually her. By October 12th, she was becoming very afraid, and Cindy called the police to file her first report. The officer that came out to take the report advised that Cindy change her number to an unlisted number, and that if she continued to get calls, she kept a log of when she got the calls and every single thing about them. If she could hear background noises, what was the tone in this guy's voice. They needed something to go off of because Cindy had no idea who was doing this. As soon as that officer left, Cindy received a call from the man telling her that she was going to pay for what she did and that the police could not keep her safe. So obviously this person is watching her every single move. On October 15th, Cindy made another call to the police and reported that her porch light had been smashed in and someone also had broken her window with a rock and entered her home. They didn't take anything, but they just entered the home. 4 days after that, Cindy called the police back because someone had broken into her home again, and this time she found her pillowcases had been slashed with a knife. Over the next few months, Cindy filed several reports with the police. She had her phone lines cut 3 different times. She found scratch marks across her doors and her windows. Someone tampered with her brakes. She also started receiving death threats that were cut out of magazines. Very retro stalker. Pat McBride of the RCMP, which is the Royal Mounted Canadian Police. Well, he was the first person to really look into the case because originally they thought it was just some weirdo prankster, but obviously things were escalating and getting more serious, so Pat got assigned to the case. Cindy really depended on Pat. Like, he offered her a sense of safety because he took the situation very seriously. Anytime a call came in, anytime there was any threat, Pat was there instantly. At some point, the lines in their relationship became very blurred and they started dating. Messy.
Can he do that?
He did.
They dated for about a year. Pat even moved in with Cindy at some point to offer her personal protection and to survey the area. He really wanted to find out who was harassing her. He wanted to see if he could pick up on anything that might lead to clues about who was doing this. While Pat was living with Cindy, he arranged for her to get extra police protection. They changed their locks and he installed a new security system. There were a lot of precautions in place to protect her. A few days after Pat McBride moved in, he caught Cindy's ex-husband, Roy Makepeace, lurking in the alley with 2 guns. But according to Roy, he was doing this in order to protect Cindy. She'd been calling him and sharing with him everything that she was going through. So he was just being a good ex-husband. He was staking out her house to see if he could catch someone in the act of harassing her. And he had weapons because obviously this was a crazy person that was doing this to her. While Pat was living with Cindy, Cindy did receive 1 phone call from her stalker. There wasn't anything threatening per se about it. The person just wouldn't respond. The heavy breathing, weird shit. That's so weird. I'm not listening to you breathe on the phone. If you have 2 inhales to say something or goodbye. Done. So yeah, this person just did their favorite heavy breathing ritual. But Pat said that he thought the call came from the airport because he could hear the flight announcements over the intercom. Well, he couldn't specifically hear the flight announcements, but he heard what sounded like flight announcements. Best clue they've had so far. On November 28th, 1982, Pat McBride found Cindy's phone lines cut in 5 different places. I don't get this because if you cut the phone line once, it's not gonna work, right? So why turn it into spaghetti? Like, why cut it 5 different times? During the time that Pat lived with Cindy, he did know that Cindy and Roy Makepeace were very close. Roy seemed genuinely concerned about who was doing this to Cindy, and he wanted to help. The 2 men would patrol the area and work together to see if they could find out who this stalker was. I even seen that they worked together on the case, which sounds sketchy to me because it's an open investigation and he, at least at some point, was a suspect. Roy was her ex who was found lurking with guns near her property. So I'm not saying he was the stalker. I'm just saying sharing case details is wild to me. Pat did eventually move out of Cindy's house, but they did continue to date and he did continue to work on the case. He was still committed to figuring out who this was. He was just doing it from outside the home. Between November and December of 1982, Cindy's stalker really escalated. She started receiving a lot of notes. A lot of these notes had photos on them, and the photos were scary. One of them was a picture of a woman on a slab in the morgue. What? She also found a picture on her car of a woman with her throat slit saying Merry Christmas. She just started leaving her all of these notes and photos of terrible things happening to women with these cut out little magazine letters threatening her or saying I'll see you soon. Cindy is obviously terrified because she's putting together that this is the purpose of the stalking. This is what this stalker wants to do to me. The police were no closer to finding out who this was. Even when Pat McBride was living with Cindy, the harassment was not deterred. This guy was motivated and willing to risk it all. In January of 1983, Cindy's stalker made his first physical contact. Now, I have seen too many dates for me to commit to one, but they ranged from like the 17th through the 30th. But they were all in January, and the date really doesn't matter. What matters is what happened. So Cindy had a very close friend named Agnes Wilcox. Agnes was also Cindy's neighbor, I believe, not like a direct neighbor, but they lived really close, and Agnes would stop by at night all of the time just to see like how Cindy's day went, and they would catch up. On this particular night, Agnes got to Cindy's house at around 9:30 p.m. and she's knocking at the door and Cindy isn't answering. She did expect Cindy to be home, but she thought maybe she's just like taking a long bath, so she was just gonna wait outside. But eventually she started getting really nervous because Cindy should have been home. Agnes thought this was really weird, so she starts looking around for Cindy. She looks along the side of the house, she looks in the backyard. She ends up finding Sydney huddled in the corner of the garage with cuts and bruises all over her in a nylon stocking wrapped around her neck several times. And spoiler, this is going to be a trend. According to Cindy, she had went out to her garage to look through some boxes for something, and someone jumped out, wrapped a stocking around her neck several times, and just started strangling her. Cindy said that when Agnes came knocking at the door, that she scared the person off. Because her attacker had come up from behind her and just wrapped the stocking around her neck, Cindy didn't get to see anything other than white sneakers as she was being strangled. And unfortunately, that's literally no help at all. In my opinion, this is the moment that changed how police were looking at the case. They felt like the crime scene was a little too neat for some sort of life and death struggle to have just occurred. Apparently, Cindy had all these boxes in her garage and they were just neatly stacked on top of one another. And the police thought it was very strange that not a single box was shifted or fallen over. There was nothing disturbed in this entire garage. They started to press her more about details that either weren't adding up or they felt just weren't true. And Cindy could tell that the energy had shifted and now they didn't believe her. Cindy decided to move after the attack on her in her garage, and in February of 1983, she officially relocated to Vancouver. That did absolutely nothing to stop the harassment because just 2 weeks after moving into her new home, Cindy received a note from her stalker that said, "Run, rabbit, run." Imagine packing up your whole life trying to escape this psychopath, and with only 2 weeks freedom, they find you. Infuriating. Cindy kept receiving threatening phone calls and letters, and the stalker also did really weird things like sent a bunch of raw meat to her house. He just got money to blow, I guess. Meat is expensive. Trigger warning, we are going to be talking about animals on this next part. Cindy came home one day to find her dog shaking in the corner, covered in shit. The freaking dog had a nylon stocking wrapped around its neck. Cindy had found several dead cats hanging in her yard, and she was just unraveling at this point. Cindy did keep a journal, and in her journal, you can just see her mental health starting to decline. When Detective Pat McBride had that first security system installed in Cindy's home, she met a man named Ozzy that doubled as a private investigator. Cindy hired Ozzy as this last-ditch effort to find out who was stalking her because she was afraid that the police weren't even looking anymore because they just didn't believe her. Ozzy ended up working for Cindy for like 6 years. This was long-term stalking, and this explains why her health, mental and physical, was deteriorating so rapidly. You can only deal with torture for so long before your body starts to react. Unlike police, Ozzy wasn't skeptical of Cindy's stories at all, and he vowed to her that he would do whatever he could to protect her. Ozzy really did his best to quiet her fears. He got her a panic button that she was to carry around with her at all times. He also got her a two-way radio so that if her phone lines were cut, she could still reach him. And it's a good thing Ozzy got her this two-way radio because on January 30th, 1984, he heard some really strange noises picking up. It kind of sounded like a struggle, but Ozzy really couldn't tell. Afraid that Cindy was in danger, Ozzy rushed right over to Cindy's home where he found her unconscious on the floor with a nylon stocking wrapped several times around her neck and a note stabbed through her hand that read, "Now you must die, cunt." Cindy reported to police that she had no idea what happened. She only had the vague memory of a needle going into her arm. I believe she said this attack happened while she was sleeping and it was dark, so she just couldn't get any details. Before, they were just acting like they didn't believe her, but now they were outright telling her, "We don't believe you." When they were investigating the crime scene at her house, they found a couple of things that they felt like proved that Cindy was making this up. First, when Ozzy got to Cindy's house, he had to kick her door in because it was deadbolted from the inside, but there was no other point of entry. Also, Cindy reported the vague memory of a needle going into her arm. She did have a pinprick, but when they tested her blood, they found nothing in it. So police were like, why would somebody stab you with a needle for literally no reason? Not to mention that one of the constables at the scene reported that there was some circular smearing of blood, like as if someone was trying to clean it up, and he accused Cindy of that. He outright accused her of fabricating the whole story and of being the one that tried to clean up the blood. Cindy, even though they didn't believe her, had reported several more attacks to police after this event. And to be clear, it wasn't always Cindy that was reporting the attacks. The private investigator Ozzy had found her several times, either unconscious or on her way there with a nylon cord wrapped around her neck. She even disappeared one time for like 3 days and just reappeared at a neighbor's house pleading for help with this nylon stocking wrapped several times around her neck. And the neighbor said that the stocking was wrapped so tightly that he had to cut it off before she passed out. By the summer of 1984, Cindy was feeling really desperate, so she agreed to let police give her a lie detector test, and she also agreed to go under hypnosis to see if she could uncover something in her subconscious that would help lead them to the stalker. I personally feel like the police were being a little sketchy with the results because first they said that she passed 2 lie detector tests. So she took 1 lie detector test, she passed, they didn't trust it, so they gave her another one. She passed again. That's what they told the public. She passed 2 lie detector tests. But then later down the line, they tried to say that she never passed, that she was too worked up for the results to be trusted. So now they were saying they were inconclusive, but you already said that she passed. I don't know, I feel like, how are you retracting like test results? She either passed or she didn't. Anyway, after the lie detector test, that's when Cindy went under hypnosis. And this is when it gets really weird. Weirder than it's already been. While under hypnosis, Cindy unlocks this horrific memory. She remembers that she was actually the witness to a double murder. So, according to Hypnotized Cindy, in July of 1981, she and her then husband, Roy Makepeace, went on this boating trip. Cindy was below deck sleeping for most of the trip, but when she awoke, they were somewhere in the Gulf Islands docked. Roy said that he was going to look at properties, I believe it was, and Cindy just stayed on the boat. After a while, Cindy hears this screaming off in the distance, and it sounds like somebody needed help. So Cindy threw her clothes on and she went off looking for this scream. So Cindy takes off into the woods, and the first thing she came across was this log cabin. And she started knocking on the door, but no one was answering. For some reason, she decided to go in anyway and see if this is where the scream was coming from. And when Cindy opened the door, her husband, Roy Makepeace, was standing over 2 dead bodies, a man and a woman. He was holding a knife and he was drenched in blood. According to Hypnotized Cindy, he then forced her to watch him dismember the bodies, put them in trash bags, and when they got back onto the boat and took off into the ocean, he tossed them overboard. Police did investigate Hypnotized Cindy's claims, and they could find no evidence of this crime. They couldn't find a missing persons report. They didn't find any bodies. They couldn't even locate this log cabin that Cindy said this horrific murder happened at. Not to mention that Cindy's sister reported that when Cindy told her the story, it was completely different. First, the murder weapon was a hatchet and not a knife. And then secondly, there was only 1 dead body instead of 2. Which those are very important things to get wrong or to change up your story about. I would argue it's like the most important detail is the murder weapon and how many victims. I listened to a recording where Cindy was confronting Roy and telling him that she knew who he was. She knew that he was a murderer, and also she knew that he was her tormentor. And Roy sounded genuinely confused. I'm not saying that he didn't do this. I'm not saying that Roy Makepeace was an innocent. I don't know, but I'm just saying he did a very good job of sounding utterly confused at what she was talking about. And police couldn't put together a single grain of evidence that this happened, so they had to drop it. Cindy was not doing well mentally at this point. She wasn't sleeping, and so she was having a very hard time staying alert. She was paranoid and hyper focused on her safety, which makes sense, but it also got in the way of her job. So they ended up asking her to resign after like 12 years. If that wasn't enough, after being seen by 2 doctors, Cindy was involuntarily committed to the hospital's psychiatric unit. They felt like she was at risk for self-harm because she had had an overdose scare. But according to Cindy, she just hadn't been sleeping well and she really wanted to go to sleep, so she took too much of her prescription. But she was not trying to, according to her. Cindy's family ended up convincing the doctors that she was not at risk and she wasn't trying to self-harm. She was just going through a lot of stress right now. She spent a little less than a week in the psychiatric unit. It's interesting to me that even though 2 separate doctors evaluated her and both deemed her to be a risk to herself, just because the family said, oh no, she's not a risk, she's stressed, they let her out. I feel like both things can be true. You can be a risk and also stressed out. On August 5th, 1985, Cindy called police to report the first of 3 fires that would be set at her residence. Each time police came to the scene, they found absolutely no evidence, not even a partial print. And because they didn't believe her, they probably weren't even looking that hard, honestly. These fires just confirmed to police that Cindy was doing this herself. They couldn't find any evidence. They would stake out her house days and weeks at a time and nothing. The day that the stakeout is over, there would be another incident. And police were just questioning, how does this stalker know every single thing? Cindy moved again in December of 1985, and this time she took the extra step of legally changing her last name to James. She painted her car a different color, and she changed her phone number again. But not long after her move, Cindy was found by one of her new neighbors in a drainage ditch. And the drainage ditch was filled with water, so it's a miracle she didn't drown. She was barely conscious, and again, a nylon stocking was tied around her neck. To add to her unfortunate downward spiral, Cindy was diagnosed with an ED by her doctor. She was rail thin and consumed almost no food, which was making her diagnosed depression even worse. She was again committed to a psychiatric hospital, and this time she stayed for 10 weeks. During this time, Cindy really showed a lot of improvement. She didn't have any instances, even after the 10 weeks when she was released from the hospital, she didn't have any instances for over a year. Her life was in an upswing. She was gaining weight. She seemed happy. But just like before, the harassment started up again. In October of 1988, police received an alert from Cindy's handheld panic device, and they rushed right over to her home. She was found naked in a coma inside of her car with her legs hanging out. Again, she had a nylon stocking wrapped several times around her neck. This time, her mouth was also duct taped shut. Cindy was rushed to the hospital, and after regaining consciousness, she actually accused her ex-husband Roy of attacking her. If I'm not mistaken, police ended up proving that he wasn't in the area at the time, and so the charges got dropped. He was denying it, and there was no evidence of his involvement. May 25th, 1989 started out to be a really good day for Cindy. She'd gotten another job in nursing, and it was payday, so she was on her way to pick up her check, cash it, and run a few errands. After Cindy cashed her check, she went shopping for her friend's son. It was his birthday, and she wanted to get him a really nice birthday gift. Night, she also had plans with her friend Agnes and Agnes's husband. They were going to come over to Cindy's and all play bridge together. Well, when Agnes and her husband made it over to Cindy's that night, Cindy was nowhere to be found. They knocked at the door. There was no answer. Her car wasn't in the driveway. Obviously, because of what she has gone through, they were very nervous. They raised the alarm immediately because they knew about Cindy's stalker. Cindy's car ended up being fined.
What did you say?
Cindy's car ended up being fined in a shopping plaza parking lot. She wasn't in the car, but they did find a lot of her belongings and there was some blood. It would be 2 weeks before Cindy's body would be found in the yard of an abandoned house. She was said to have died from a fatal dose of morphine, and there were injection marks found on her. And the autopsy showed that she probably died the same day that she went missing. When Cindy was found, she was found hog-tied, so wrists tied to her ankles behind her back. She also had a nylon stocking wrapped around her neck several times. Even though it seems pretty impossible for someone to be able to tie themselves up in that manner, Cindy's death was ruled self-inflicted, and that really upset her family and friends. According to them, they knew for a fact that Cindy was being stalked by an actual person. She was not making this up. Cindy's mother, Pat McBride, and even Agnes and her husband had all reported events of harassment, and they claimed that there's no way Cindy would have been able to physically do that while they were there. Even Cindy's co-workers had stated that she had received calls while at work and they heard the stalker themselves. Furthermore, the family felt like police never even considered the fact that there might be an actual murderer out there. They just jumped to accusing Cindy. With the amount of morphine that was found in her body, a lot of people felt like it was really a reach to think that she would have been able to hog-tie herself so precisely and wrap this stocking around her neck. And she would have had to inject herself somewhere else because there were no vials or needles found at the scene. There was an inquest done on the investigation, so they were investigating the investigation just to make sure everything was up to par because people were outraged. They felt like after years of not helping Cindy, they were just throwing her away and not helping her once again. After 40 days of witness testimony, the jury landed exactly where I land, and that is that they don't know. This is where I am. There were a lot of things that Cindy reported that didn't make sense to me. Like having a violent struggle in a garage filled with stacked boxes and not a single thing gets knocked out of place. Police sitting out on stakeouts where nothing happened, and the moment they leave, there's an incident. Cindy moved, changed her name, changed her car color, and still was found in less than 2 weeks. This is all very possible, but to me, it just seems very unlikely. However, it is very hard for me to fathom that with the way she was found, that she could do that to herself, all while having 10 times the lethal amount of morphine in her body. I'm just not seeing that. It can be kind of hard to believe that someone would hurt themselves in this way, but ever since I did that case on Ellie Williams, I put nothing past no one. I'll add a card in case you want to go watch that story. It's the second story out of 3. There are 3 true crime hoaxes, and you just will not believe the things that people will do to themselves for attention. Ellie was psychotic. Because of that, I am very careful in saying what people will or won't do to themselves because you would be very surprised. Cindy's ex-husband, Roy Makepeace, was convinced that Cindy had multiple personalities and that she wasn't even aware that she was doing this to herself. Let me know in the comments what you think happened to Cindy. Do you think she was doing this to herself, or do you think she had a stalker for 7 years that police let get away with eventually what would be her murder? Remember to give me a like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content, and I will see you down another rabbit hole.